Welcome everybody to your hello. We have a packed house, like 300 people out there. Wow. I wish all of you at home could see this. Yeah, it's really something.
So festive.
Wow. That's really neat. So anyway, welcome to your Thanksgiving edition of Policy and Equity Committee. We forewent having policy on our traditional Thursday which would have been next week, which we all thought would have been fun to have Dan Hoying make us a turkey dinner, but
I believe that's still scheduled.
It's still scheduled,
but the turkey dinner.
Okay, so we can all show up. So all 300 who are here, you're more than welcome to attend. So thank you so much for being here. We got a big and lively agenda as always. So we'll start customarily to my right, your left, with Ms. Scott, and do introductions down the line.
Stephanie Scott, Assistant General Counsel.
Daniel Hoying, the General Counsel.
Ben Lindy, Board Member.
Mike Morosky, Board Member.
Steve Fulton, Board Member.
Excellent. So let's dive right into it. Many people watched our last policy committee meeting, and many people watched our board meeting just a few days ago, as they were interested in this idea of a potential policy requiring vaccinations, COVID vaccinations for students. That policy is not moving forward, which I think most folks know. So before we get into agenda item number 2, which is a continued discussion about potential sort of sub-policies regarding vaccination, is there anything for continued discussion regarding the COVID requirement? I don't have anything, but I was curious if anyone else did.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I would still be interested in, and I think the General Counsel supplied us with some information. I'm still interested in some of the educational experiences that do have close physical contact, especially extracurricular, and even there might be some curricular issues and curricular programs, maybe at the School for the Creative and Performing Arts, where indeed there is close contact, very narrow, very specific. I'm still interested in that, and I'm also have received some comments too from some professionals, our employees actually, about our faculty and staff that actually, as many people know out there, actually perform medical procedures on students and have that close personal contact. So, as you know, I've posed the general one, suggested some narrow. I want to narrow it down a little bit more, very specific to those areas, if I could. Just further discussion about that.
And I do too. And actually, so I should have been clear. I was roping all of that into agenda item 2. So I want to have, I want to have that. Yeah, for sure. I want to have that discussion too, and just see like what that might mean. With one question, but I'll go over to Mr. Lindy if he has anything.
This is just on student vaccines in general. Yeah, I think I had a couple other thoughts after Monday's meeting. One is I think I happen to think that having kids get vaccines is the right thing to do. That's why my family's getting vaccinated. I also think it's really important that we look at the results from parent surveys. So I agree with everything Mr. Morosky said. Just as I think about the future, there are a couple of questions I had, most of which came up Monday, but I don't know that all of them did. I think that for us to be incredibly proactive about messaging how we're offering opportunities for kids to get vaccinated in an elective fashion, even though this is not required, that's highly encouraged. Here are lots of ways where people can do it. And just making sure that there's nobody in CPS who doesn't get a vaccine because they don't have access to one. I think was one thought. Another thought was I know that the interim superintendent took this as a next step, but I'm really interested in seeing numbers on how many kids are having to quarantine and for how long, and to what extent is that impacting our ability to do learning recovery. Because I think that's just an important, there's a number behind that somewhere, and a big number would mean one set of things, and a small number I think would mean different. Mm-hmm. I think the last thought I had was I don't know for sure that this would change the result of the survey. But I have to imagine that a question that was worded a little bit differently would land differently with parents. So the difference between, do you support a requirement for having students vaccinated versus do you support a policy that says either you need to be vaccinated or you need to continue wearing a mask or you need to submit to, testing. I don't know. It's clear from what we got that what we asked about is not what parents want to do. I'm trying to hold open the idea that there's a third way that we could figure out together that would take a meaningful step forward. And I think at some point I'd like us to ask that question. I'm okay to hold on asking it until after we get some of those numbers on the quarantine issue. Mm-hmm. But at some point I think it's important to ask that.
Really good comments. My editorial aside, and I too, had some issues with the way the questions were asked. That being said, I don't think this is the right policy to move forward with, regardless. But I do think that the question was a little black and white, and I don't know that this issue is. But you have asked, Mr. Lindy, if I can ask you a follow-up question, if that's okay. I know you asked about the number of kids quarantining because I think it's prudent to wait until we get that number before moving forward with maybe another question. Did you give that assignment in our board meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know that the interim wrote it down. She's on. I remember saying explicitly there are a lot of things going on. I don't know that we need this immediately, but in the next couple of weeks, I think was what I said. Okay. What I don't have a line of sight into. What's that?
No, I just I think there needs to be. I think it needs to be Monday. I was going to say, given that bandwidth, we may never not see it. In my opinion.
I think that you may be right. The thing I don't know is how easy or hard that number is. But
it's important though. I think I just want to support you in this. I think it's an important number to have, and I think we should be able to get it pretty quick.
Yeah.
The number you're requesting is the percentage of students vaccinated?
No, it's the thing I'm worried about is you can imagine if you got a class of 30 kids, how many of those students are having to spend time in quarantine because of a close contact? Yeah. And if it's lots of kids for lots of days, that's lots of learning that's happening. If it's a small number of kids for a small number of days, I'm less worried. And also, in what schools is that happening? Is it the schools where we have the most learning recovery?
So some updated numbers on number of kids quarantined or excluded from school.
Yeah, the thing that's behind the question is how worried should we be that kids who are quarantining or that our need to quarantine is making it harder to do learning recovery. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple of responses to that. First of all, I think that the survey wasn't it through Fawcett?
Yeah.
So is it the contractor that makes those questions, or do we submit questions?
I don't know, but I have to. My strong hypothesis is that we give them the language to use.
So I think that's even the larger issue is the nature of how questions are formed. I have another issue about. I think it is clear that we are, as the chairman said, we are not proceeding with this general policy, and the public has spoken, if you will, and they know that we are not proceeding. And I don't want us to go through the process like we did last year, where we look like we decide something and then don't decide it. So whatever further discussion we have to have about this, it really does need to be couched in a way that is particularly unique or very specific. The other thing I would say about this whole piece is that to do this, and the last thing I'll say about the general policy, is a tremendous expansion of what we think our role is if we do this. and we're not doing it. So that's part of the reason we're not doing it. But people have to understand our concern is the health and safety of the kids and the loss of instruction, all those big issues certainly forced us into thinking about this very, very seriously and to continue to think about it in a smaller way. But this is beyond the scope, I think, of what we might do because our job is to provide instruction, not necessarily be the health department. But Mr. Lindy's point about wanting to know about quarantine and those numbers, that is about loss of instruction. So that's something too that might be able to be mitigated in some way. And I think that the chair has brought to us a couple of things about how to mitigate the loss of instruction and the changing of the quarantine rules, and the administration's been responsive to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Thank you, Mr. Lindy. If it's okay, I'm just going to kind of move right into the second piece, which on here says athletic vaccinations, but in spirit was actually more, I think, all encompassing of the sort of what I call sub policies. I know it's not a real thing, but I am interested in seeing, Ms. Bolton was talking about this last month, and it stuck on my crawl last month, and then of course it became clear Monday that this other policy is not happening, which I'm good with. It's still with me, like what would it look like? But before I go to my colleagues, I have one question to set the stage, and it is, don't we already require proof of vaccination for our close contact sports?
No, so I followed up with the athletic department on that question.
Okay.
CPS is not requiring, does not require or
Okay.
collect as a condition of participation proof of vaccination of athletes participate in athletics or extracurricular. There are coaches, and coaches are encouraged to encourage student athletes to get vaccinated because it keeps our student athletes on the field. The teams that have had to have large scale quarantines have had to miss multiple games sometimes because of quarantining. And so it has become kind of a team ethic, but there's no requirement, and it's not a condition of participation. I also wanted to update you that we have now adopted the mask to stay, test to play protocol that the Ohio Department of Education put out last week. And I shared in your packet the information that the athletic department sent to ADs and principals, which includes kind of guidance on that test to play or mask to stay, test to play.
Yeah.
So that guidance, we have required masks from the beginning of the year, but that guidance has been important for us academically or within schools because the number of students who would be considered a community close contact and formerly would have had to quarantine at home are now, because that guidance extends to school-related activities, we've been able to extend that they're now able to quarantine in school. So that's like our after-school programs, our before-school programs, our athletics. Those kids are allowed to quarantine in school, have a mask, and remain in school. It also the test to play that's also been adopted. And the way that works is if you have a close contact on a team, everybody's a close contact has to stop. They can't continue until they have a negative test. They bring a negative test in, then they're allowed to continue assuming they're non-symptomatic, no symptoms whatsoever. They test again in 5 days. They're presumed negative, but they confirm that with a test in 5 to 7 days, and then they're good to continue. So that we have adopted the test to play as well. Yep.
Open it up to my colleagues.
Yes, first of all, the number 2, it's just verbally expanding that beyond athletics, the extracurricular. But I think extracurricular close contact. I know we start to pick and choose, but I don't think everybody that is participating in extracurricular is participating in something that is particularly risk oriented. And so I think the administration might be able to produce a list of those things. I mean, if it's dancing, it's SCPA or what have you, and that is a matter of vaccination or regular testing. And then this other piece about the group of folks that are our employees who are in are responsible for actual medical kinds of things and personal services that would need to be rendered to particular students. Whether it's I won't even go graphic on that, but I think everybody understands. If you're a school system and you have kids arriving by ambulance, then we are the district supplying special services that other districts aren't and can't. I worry about certainly those kids, but more in their families, but I'm also obviously worried about our staff that should be all vaccinated, but or testing. I just think that's a narrow area of concern that I would be thinking about. But I'd rather have the administration figure out who those narrow parties might be.
Appreciate it. One follow-up, I think, with that right before we move on, but I want to see if Mr. Lindy has any.
No, thank you.
Okay. So my follow-up is pretty simple. So is there an assignment out of that or something you'd like to see in December policy committee or maybe even before that at a board meeting?
I would like that for the next policy meeting, if the administration would just kind of contemplate from their expertise what that would be. I mean, it's obvious, perpetual, daily, or whatever, close contact. I mean, and you tell us what that really means. I mean, I'm not trying to figure out the difference between volleyball and basketball, but you all figured all that out. And I did have a follow-up. The people that we hire, that we pay, that are coaching, are they not? They're required. What's that situation?
All employees. So if you're a paid coach, you are subject to the vaccine mandate. Volunteer coaches are not subject to the vaccine.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Good, Dan? Cool. Number 3, attendance boundary lines. And there are 3 subheadings: history of the current boundary lines, legal changes to boundary lines, and what are current city recognized neighborhoods. Now, we're not going to go through every single neighborhood, but we are going to get high level sort of stuff on, what is the state here. And so, of course, the last one is interesting to me because there are at least 3 that I know of for different versions of what the neighborhoods are. So I assume we're kicking it over to General Counsel. Ms. Bolton, I know this was your agenda item, so.
Yeah, and I think this is huge. And the first question was who decides boundary lines and attendance lines. And there are existing neighborhood lines that are recognized by the city. And I think it's just good to do a kind of a overview of our policies that pertain to who does what and why and how in the way we have it currently set up. These are all policies rather than just practices.
So we have some information, and then Ms. Scott's going to share with you. I will say we appreciate your participation in this conversation. We've pulled together kind of what we can. Probably our best institutional knowledge on this subject is Jen Wagner, and she can't be here this morning, but to the extent this discussion continues, I think she'd be a good person to help with this. Out of desperation, yesterday we reached out to Sarah Trimble Oliver, our good friend, because she has a lot of institutional knowledge. She does. So a lot of what we're presenting came from Sarah as well. But here's what we have, and then glad to take more assignments for next month.
And your presentations, including the policies that you submitted to us as well.
I submitted the policy that I gave to you was the enrollment in neighborhood elementary schools, because our neighborhood elementaries are the only schools within the district that have actual boundaries. The other reason I submitted that to you, importantly, that policy says students residing in the attendance area of a CPS neighborhood elementary shall have the ability to enroll. Mm-hmm. There is no exception. There is no waiting list. There is no.
That's American.
I'm sorry?
That's American public education. You will take this child if they live within the attendance boundaries.
And that's how we treat our neighborhood elementary.
That's right.
Okay. Stephanie, with that.
In regards to the history, what we were kind of able to pull together is, I think we kind of alluded to this in our previous conversation, but kind of the initial boundaries were kind of based in kind of the racial diversity back in the 70s that was trying to be implemented. So on the Bronson versus the Cincinnati Board of Education filed in 1973, the NAACP sought to stop the building of all Black schools and create a public school system which African American students were included. CPS responded when the case was settled 10 years later with changes to some of our open enrollment policies, and then also kind of the onset of the magnet schools. In the mid-1970s, CPS kind of launched the performing arts, the foreign language, and the Montessori method called the magnet. So that was kind of when that was instituted. But based on our kind of most recent knowledge, there really wasn't any, since 2001, not any major districting boundary changes except for the cans and the Hyde Park example that we had used.
And we're so proud of that.
And so I guess even when that consideration was taken, I mean, there was like a geographic analysis was done. We surveyed the residents, and from what was shared, I guess specifically with the cans example, that the board at that time had gave specific direction to make sure that the boundaries were limited to Clifton, Cuff, and then I think it was the Spring Grove Village. And so with some of that redesigning, that's probably the most recent change that we're aware of. And then also, of course, we would always have to take the capacity of the school into consideration as well. But as Dan was saying, if the children live within those neighborhood boundaries, we're going to make room for whoever lives in those boundaries. So I guess there were some other scenarios that predates me, but I guess there was a conversation at once around the Pleasant Hill, Wooden Hill Elementary School scenario, and then also the Pleasant Ridge Woodford neighborhood scenario. Those were never involved, but those are kind of two more recent ideas that came up. I think we're talking about the high schools of choice. I guess previously we had the 5 kind of neighborhood high schools, the rest were magnets, but now we have kind of the high school of choice. So those are just kind of some of the more recent things that have happened as far as the impact of enrollment. And then we have a relationship with Cropper, who does kind of our maps and neighborhood maps. So we were trying to work with Jeremy to try to see if we can maybe even locate maybe some previous renditions.
They're all in my room.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay, well,
in large size. I can take you there right after the meeting.
We've kind of been on a hunt to try to find some of those. And so, but based on the current, right now you can, if parents went onto our website, they would be able to see kind of what, like you said, the neighborhood boundaries are based on what the Cincinnati the city recognizes as neighborhoods, but then also you can see how those where our kind of neighborhood lines are based on, which is attributed to our neighborhood schools. So.
The only thing I'd add also is again, that website is still a good resource. There's still the ability, and Stephanie actually yesterday was going through and lining up which of our schools match with which city recognized neighborhoods.
Yeah.
That was the priority of the board with respect to the creation of the Clifton area neighborhood school, was to pick to have our boundaries match neighborhood boundaries. And I think what we learned is even then that there was some disputes about the actual, I think it was within Cuff, there were some disputes among even residents over where those neighborhood boundaries fell. But the website does do a good job of showing where the neighborhoods are, recognized neighborhoods versus where the school boundaries are. It's just not all of our schools match up with those. Very few kind of match up and overlap.
Right.
I really appreciate it. That summary is as perfect as it could be.
So we're glad. we were like, we're trying to put together as much as we could.
That's impressive. Now,
Yeah.
This 30 years of it predate me, but at least, the last 12 or 14 years, that's what was happening. The magnet was invented. Boards decided that to save middle class from fleeing. We've had a facilities master plan that, had to right size all of our schools. I mean, we lost at least 12 schools in writing the size. We've gone through tremendous stuff. federal law and federal restrictions and mandates have changed significantly since the 70s. And for me, when we've rediscovered our neighborhood schools again, which has been a priority for almost a decade now and really accelerated about 6 years ago with Vision 2020, or people talking about Vision 2020, our magnet schools have been reduced, and we have more, I think, more neighborhood schools. We've also asked over the last few years that our administration really see if what we are advertising is what we're providing, particularly as it pertains, I think this last time, to Paideia. And as a disciple of Paideia, I am, we've, I think, eliminated that from our high school and also our elementaries that may still be carrying the name, at least maybe on the west side. But so we have started to draw back on choice to a certain extent and emphasize more access. Because when you really think, if you don't have, let's take it in reverse. If you have high schools of choice, in many ways it's high schools of access. What is actually accessible and to whom? And where are kids going? Or from an instructional standpoint, if you are a STEM high school, are all of your students really STEM? If you're going to have admittance to by test or by interest or by inclination or by previous instruction like we do, hopefully with the Montessori, and our policies speak to that, what's the what's the precursor to somebody saying, I want to go to Aiken New Tech if you haven't demonstrated that there's a particular interest in project-based learning? So there's also an internal kind of thing we could fix, because it's a demand, a very hard demand on the high schools to have names and have instructional stuff that they are offering, and yet everybody in the building is supposed to be doing it, and they may not have the interest, but they're choosing high schools. There's a whole bunch of stuff that impacts our report card, it impacts our transportation, and it impacts our truth in lending as to what we're doing. And my interest in this is the rediscovery of the neighborhoods. And I want we kind of think choice allows us more access. It really is not necessarily allowing more access for particular purposes. How shall I say it? These policies that you presented to us that are ours, and I remember endless policy meetings, talking about enrollment, whether it's intra or inner or whatever, elementary, or when we did preschool, that changed a lot of our thinking too, because we were building the preschool. My interest right now is for us to think about what you just said, matching the neighborhoods to at least the neighborhood schools and what that means. And there's a wonderful big map about, what and a little map too, that shows. And if you go through that, I'd like to know how many, how many of our neighborhood schools actually are reflecting the neighborhood. I know in my neighborhood school, which is Pleasant Hill, does not reflect the neighborhood. To the point that this district for 20 years thought that everything like west of Hamilton or west of Belmont was Mount Airy, which of course it is not. That people did that to try to get, I guess, diversity or something. So we were really saying no to existing neighborhoods that have been there, some of them 200 years. And then we told people, please go to your neighborhood schools. Yeah, so I feel so very misplaced. Here's my point on that. If we actually had neighborhood schools, we'd also be increasing our whole green approach, our whole mobility, our whole safety approach, our whole walkability, because people might go to, our problem now is that some of our neighborhood schools do not reflect our neighborhood. And that is determining ratings along the way. It's also sending out an urban legend that somehow they're not as good as the magnets. And we've been living that down. This is a huge rethinking, and it really is old thought. Because we are declining in the amount of magnets. Our Vision 2020 has helped our efforts at our neighborhood greatly. And I would like, if we could, share with the next meeting, I would like to see kind of a rating, as we've done in another meeting, we've talked about enrollment. Here's the other thing. 23 of our neighborhood, or excuse me, elementary schools are under enrolled. I mean, that's my math based upon the charts that the administration has given us. That they say that they, and I believe them, have adjusted to the square footage and all that other stuff. It's a completely different way to look at how we get the children to school. Because look what now has happened when Metro is not able to provide the service. It's only, they claim it's the same as pre-COVID, then we really need to look at the financial books if they think this was pre-COVID numbers. We cannot be so dependent upon this. And as for high schools, I don't think anything would be wrong. It's on west side, east side, particularly, that you had a couple of neighborhood schools, but you keep some of your other high schools that have specific course of study. Woodward, everybody needs to have access to Woodward. Everybody that can pass the test or the audition should have access to school for the performing arts. Same with Walnut. But I don't see anything wrong, and I think it would increase the stature of the other high schools if we also say, okay, or you're very interested in language, or you're very interested in some of the other stuff, IT or whatever. Golly, let's at least see that you have that interest and capacity. Not that we would deny you that opportunity, but right away there's going to be some sort of elevated program in that area, and not make the other 80% of the kids in the high school have to do a STEM curriculum they had no idea that they were in store for. They're going to Hughes because mom and dad did. So this a great conversation. It's a long conversation, and some of it can be really cut short because it just said here in one of the policies you showed us is that the district assigns students in elementary schools consistent with the best interests of students and the best use of resources of the district. I mean, that is true. This is not something that we're not reinventing the district, we're reinventing enrollment and instruction. So I think I'd like to make an assignment, if I could, that I want to see the map. I want to know which ones and how far off they are. And you are absolutely right. When Mr. Morosky was on a committee with me, and I think it was Mrs. Bates
that's right.
as well.
Right.
It might have been policy or
It was policy.
Policy committee. Policy committee fought for that CANS precedent. And Dan is totally right that even within the city there is disputed territory. But because every neighborhood council can decide what theirs is, and the city might recognize all of it, but there's dispute between. I'm looking at what the city recognizes, but when we did this, we not only created the CANS precedent, but we also advised on both the west side, central corridor changes for a few schools, and we also suggested, particularly Mrs. Bates, suggested some major revisions on the east side, which in fact impacted Silverton and J.P. Parker and Woodford. And we did follow up on part of that because we agreed to make additions to PRM and keep its boundary lines as is. Mm-hmm. There's also a policy within this district, and I'll shut up after this, that we can't force people into a worse school, worse performing school at least, worse graded school, by making any kinds of changes. And anybody that knows anything, finally, whoever's wherever they are would be grandfathered. during that transition. And if you live in Cincinnati, you might have to also have some legacy agreements, meaning 4 generations have gone to this school. I want my kid to go to that school. There's ways that we can make it very much a Cincy kind of thing. So I'd like to be able to continue to discuss, and Mr. Chair's issue about open enrollment. This is about enrollment as we face the next great phase of growth.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm sorry to, well, I'm not sorry to monopolize it. Frankly, I appreciate the time the chair gave.
You don't need to apologize. This is a hyper important conversation that we had started my first year on the board, and I was excited about it, and it died. And I think it died for a whole myriad amount of reasons. I think COVID was part of it, but we blame everything on COVID. I think there were a lot of other reasons too, but it's time to talk about it again. We're going to have a new superintendent. It is, in addition to hiring the superintendent, I think, this is my opinion, this is like the issue facing us as we move forward, and we're talking about growth. And talking about growth without talking about this is irresponsible. So I appreciate you talking about it. You have more institutional knowledge than I do with it. I support it. You know, there are some real realities we just have to be able to admit. You know, some things are sacred, sure, like to your point, the legacy piece, but other than that, a lot's not sacred, you know, and we need to have that, and which will lead into our next thing, but I want to see if Mr. Mindy has anything.
Thanks, Mr. Moreski. I just wanted to make sure, I was going to try to paraphrase what I think I heard Ms. Bolton say to make sure I was following just what the next steps are. That'd be okay. So I think the assignment was not to change anything about our enrollment system, or not even to propose a change in it, but to gather information so that we can look at it. And that in terms of the sequencing of this, I think I mentioned this in our last meeting, these would be very big changes, potentially big changes. And that those are things that I think I would advocate. I think, and I think this is what people are saying, sequenced as part of bringing on a new superintendent, giving that person a chance to look at all of CPS and all of the many things that are going on, and doing some prioritizing. And this might rise to the top as one of the most important things for us to figure out. I don't think it would be at the bottom. It might be in the middle. But I think what we can do in anticipation of that is get all the information available, and then figure out where this fits alongside other possible priorities. Is that right? Not right at all, sort of right?
I think that's part of it, is that we are in transition, regardless of superintendency, but that's one of the contributory factors. We also know that we have to the current strategic plan or creating new ones, which, you know, that might obviously depend on the superintendency and who and what's there. So yeah, this is the opportune time, but what I want to say, and I know it's because we've been at this so many times, we start something and we don't follow through. We've been doing this for a while. This is not new, as has been pointed out. We've been dealing with it all the way back to the 70s, but more particularly in the last 10 years, I'm trying to be as many years as possible, we've been talking about this. And this follows up with a lot of other priorities that we've been using, like the Vision 2020. So we start at a good place, and it's going to be ongoing. But growth is going to have to be a major consideration if we want to be one of the big dogs and do it right. So yeah, I agree with that. I want to see the map.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, y'all. We're going to move around the agenda just because number 4 kind of interrupts this conversation. And just so you know, Ms. Roberts, that number 4 doesn't need to be longer than 30 seconds if it's not, just kind of keeping it on the agenda. So enrollment policies, this is tied to this. I had asked, it's no secret to anybody that's been on this board for more than a day, that I despise open enrollment policy. Just to be very clear and direct about it. Yeah, we're going to get, and we'll get that from Dan here. He'll give us the history. I just want to get, between. So you live outside open enrollment for the edification of the 300 people in person and the 7 that are watching. They're very quiet, very well behaved audience. Thank you very much we appreciate it. Open enrollment for people's edification. If you live outside our district, you can send your kid to our school and not have to pay Cincinnati taxes. At least that's how I see it. I'm prepared. I'm always willing to be proven wrong. I haven't been in the past 4 years, so I'd love to. No, not regarding this issue. No, I've been proved wrong many times. Most recently Monday when I saw the results of the parent survey. So it's all good. So what is the history? Why do we do this?
Okay. A little bit of a history on open enrollment. So school districts in Ohio have a choice of essentially one of 3 enrollment policies with respect to students from other districts. Districts can be closed to all but resident students. They can be open to adjacent districts only, or they can be open to all Ohio districts. Prior to 2013, Cincinnati Public Schools was a district that was closed to all districts. But if you are a closed district, you also have an option of accepting students on a tuition basis, which we did. So prior to 2013, there were students from other districts attending CPS, but did so on a tuition basis. I have no idea how tuition was calculated, but that was the scenario before 2013. In 2013, and I think former Assistant Superintendent Gabe Lofton led this effort to some extent. We transitioned to become an open enrollment district, open to all students from all Ohio school districts. We passed Board Policy 5113, which remains in your packet. That has been amended a few times since its passage in 2013, but has largely remained the same. The concept that Cincinnati Public Schools adopted in 2013 was that first priority would always go to in-district residents. Then second priority, if there were vacancies available, would go to out-of-district residents who had a parent who was employed by Cincinnati Public Schools. And then last priority would go to out-of-district residents without a parent employed. There's some sibling priority within there as well, but that's the general concept. We've had that policy since 2013. I will say the Ohio Department of Education did a fairly extensive audit of us in 2018, 2019. I think the results were ultimately released in 2020 or the end of 2019. And I was highly involved in defending the district during that audit or working with the auditors, as was our customer health department. Enrollment department. It's not necessarily a very, there's some criticisms of our implementation of open enrollment, but primarily their criticism was that in Ohio, if you have an open enrollment policy, you are supposed to establish capacity limits at each school. And at least it was my just kind of editorial impression that ODE had a rather simplified view of what a capacity limit is, because they would say, just come up with a limit for each school. And there's a good reason for why you would have a capacity limit, because you don't want a situation where a school is getting to pick and choose which out-of-district open enrolled students they're going to accept, and using a bad reason, for example, a race reason or some other bad reason. But again, when we are staffing and looking at capacity limits, take for example our neighborhood elementary schools, which we have a board policy that says it doesn't matter, you will never be rejected at your neighborhood elementary school because of too much capacity. You won't be put on a waiting list. And so if that means we have to add a teacher at a grade level or open up an ELA to a classroom, we're going to do it. And we have done this. So we have not operated in this sort of capacity limit way. But that's why we were criticized by ODE. The guidance we give to schools is that again, in-district students must be accepted first. In general, I think I have found that to be implemented, though that gets complicated too, because let's say in May 1, you tell customer service, okay, I have 10 vacancies, and those vacancies get opened up to open enrolled students. And then on June 1, you have 3 more residents who move to the district. And then it's like, well, do we displace these open enrolled students that we just accepted, or do we displace these open enrolled students that have been here since first grade and are now entering sixth grade? It becomes very complicated. There are impressions that this is done for financial reasons. My impression is the school has no concept of the financial, like they're not accepting kids because they're getting more money or less money. It has nothing to do with that, nor district-wide. Last thing I looked at, which may be interesting to you, is just within Hamilton County, what schools are open enrolled and closed. Open enrolled districts are Laughlin, North College Hill, Northwest, Reading, Southwest, Three Rivers, and Winton Woods. Closed districts are Deer Park, Finneytown, Forest Hills, Indian Hill, Loveland, Madeira, Marymount, Mount Healthy, Norwood, Oak Hills, Princeton, Sycamore, and Wyoming. Glad to answer any questions.
Can I, if I may, if you were to look on a map, Ms. Bolton likes maps, and I've looked on a map, and if you look on a map in your office, if this is CPS, this is closed. Nobody's taking our kids. Nobody, they're like, we don't want your kids, Cincinnati. I take issue with that, but two things quickly. One is, and Dan, this is a sincere question. If I recall correctly, it was like a couple years ago when I got on my sort of semi-annual tear on this. I had asked about the financial piece, and did we not find that it was actually costing us money, or am I misremembering that this costs us money?
District-wide, I don't know. The way that financially it works is that for an in-district student, we get our state share. For an out-of-district student who's open enrolled, we get that district's state share. So
That's
there's
right.
a reconciliation state level. I have no idea. Sincerely, we can look at that, but I don't know.
Could I just make that as a assignment again? And I feel like we did have that, and I'm like 90% with it. I'm usually not 90% with my memory, and I'm 90% that it costs us money. So yeah, we could get that. That would be great. And then my last,
For the years, just the sister here, for the years that we fought it, and there were 2 school board members that fought open enrollment, both myself and Kathy Ingram, and it could have passed. But that was for at least 3 years. There were tallies as to whether it was paying for itself, meaning we were getting as much money as we were losing, where the other districts had open enrollment. And then I think the last thing I remember is pre-COVID that was no longer the case, that we were getting more money than we were losing. And that was a district-wide thing. So that I know there's been, and board staff might be able to help with that, because those were kind of assignments that were given for this. Now I'm sure it's not profitable for us, so to speak.
I'll just say again, there is some misconception, understandably, that students are taken or not taken for financial reasons. At a school level, they have no idea. What has no impact on their budget. At a customer service level, again, they're not looking at that. So this is what it says from the state. Open enrollment students are counted in their native home school district for enrollment purposes. So if an Indian Hill student enrolls in CPS, Indian Hill has 1 extra student, and then that state share comes to CPS.
Right.
If we have vacancies, it's difficult for me to see how we would be losing money, because we're just getting a new state share, additional funds. But I'm happy to look into that further if that's
Sure.
Mike.
sorry, if we pick up an additional student, tell me if I'm missing this, we're going to get their state share, but not their local share. And what it costs us to educate a student is the sum of the state share and the local share. So I could absolutely see how we lose money on students that we enroll. No?
I believe that's true. I don't believe their state share is reduced by their local share. So when we get money for a kid from Cincinnati Public Schools, you know, we get our state share, but there's a factor that it's reduced based on the wealth of our district. I think it's an
Right.
unreduced state share. But your point is well taken.
Yeah. I could just imagine if the revenue per kid in Indian Hill is Indian Hill local plus Indian Hill state. That student comes to us, we lose the Indian Hill local, you know? And so I think, I don't ramble on. I'm glad you asked for that. That was going to be my question.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no, it'd be good to get that info again. And then lastly, and Ms. Bolton, you may be the right person to ask for this, or General Counsel, but I would love your perspective as somebody who was here throughout this whole thing. What was the reason to do this initially? So that's been lost on me in the history. Like, why did Mr. Lofton fight so hard for this, and why did people support it? What was the reason? What was the reason given?
And it was the administration fighting for it, and he was representing the administration. And they did fight hard for it, and a majority of the board agreed finally after I think it was almost 3 years of discussion. But there are reasons. For the financial piece was presented that it was not so negative for us. The major reason was actually diversity. The major reason was that we needed to begin to diversify our families and our student bodies, and that we had certain schools that were the only place you could get certain kinds of education. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And part of the diversification was to, if you will, whether it was racial, whether it was geographic, whether it was talent-wise, whatever, it made sense. And what was happening was in two of our very restricted schools, the School for the Creative and Performing Arts and Walnut, that's where it really manifests itself, as well as our Montessori. So what was happening was it was about diversity. It was also about, believe it or not, this idea of wanting to have a digital academy that was state oriented. And then that died, and then we now just experienced why that was a good idea. So I think that's part of it. The final reason was, as you point out, and that list that Dan just did, as a person who spent 36 years in Wyoming, they'll never, open enrollment, hell no. No, neither this community or that community. And I think your spin on it was a little different than mine would be. The list of where it is open enrollment literally are the edges of our district. And those communities have been drawing our kids away, whether it's Three Rivers, Northwest, NCH. We have a problem in one of our schools as to why it has to be a 7th and 8th, a K-8. And that is, help me out, in the valley. Sailor Park at Three Rivers, that's one of them. And then when you go any further, right there at Galbraith and Vine Street, I think it's like beautiful school. My first one Hartwell. Oh, they couldn't come up with it. Senior moment, forgive me. But here's the thing: we have to have a 7th and 8th grade there because the people in the sort of adjoining area pull our kids off because we have an issue, perhaps, with the kids at Hartwell not necessarily wanting to go to one of our high schools or any of our high schools. So that's an internal problem we should be working with. But that's where you start to get the whole race piece. And that's difficult. And so it was also using the opportunity to fight back. So it's a lot of bad reasons for bad situations and a lot of good reasons for some good situations. But that was the reasoning.
That's helpful. I appreciate that.
Yeah, out of context, it's a stupid thing to do. But
No.
now, think about it. If you have open enrollment, what does that do with Cincinnati Digital Academy? I mean, we could have a statewide digital academy.
With open enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I think it might be important to add is going to a closed, I have no real strong feelings either way, but going to a closed enrollment system does not mean that you couldn't adopt a policy that employees would still be allowed to send their kids.
Right.
You can have a closed system with the exception of employees.
Can you have a closed system with the exception of a specialized program like a digital academy?
I believe so, but I'd like to look into.
Let's check into that.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Yeah, Ben.
I just, if we make an assumption, I think this will turn out to be wrong, but if we make an assumption that it's cost neutral either way, what I would advocate for is we're open enrollment only with districts that are willing to be open enrollment with us. And I don't know if that is something we could do or not, but that would be what I would do.
Why don't you look into that too, Dan? All right, cool.
Very
All right.
sinister. I like
No,
that.
this is good.
No, like seriously, why should it be cool for your
Totally.
kids to come here and not our kids to go there?
Absolutely.
I have a feeling it's not going to be revenue neutral, but if it were.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll say one thing finally, where we've had open enrollment by tuition and stuff, at any one of those few buildings where people would be paying tuition, at any one of those, there's been issues to that. So this caused a complete reshaping of School for the Creative and Performing Arts. And we've all lived through that experience. So this is another big, excellent topic.
Yeah, and I appreciate that I feel like this time it's come up, and poor Dan has dealt with different asks from me throughout the first few years here I've been on the board, but I feel like this conversation feels more serious, feels like there's some footing to it. So for whatever it's worth, I attribute it to the chemical makeup of this committee. So Mr. Lindy, Ms. Bolton, appreciate y'all. So next, kind of a recurring sort of agenda. So Ms. Roberts, I would invite you up. We don't expect, a full-on report or anything, obviously, but just like an update on where you are, how we can support you with the policy audit.
I don't want to always add to everybody's work, but I really appreciate having the internal auditor at policy meetings, and would ask that the superintendent think about that if we look at the reshaping of the policies in January. That I think it helps to have the internal auditor be one of the administrative liaisons.
I concur.
If that suits also suits the audit committee.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here. So as a very brief update, we've made some good progress since I last spoke with you. We've identified all of the administrative owners of the 4 policies that were selected. For those who may be watching, the 4 policies that were selected by our Policy and Equity Committee consisted of 2255, which is our equity policy, 2256, which is our anti-racism policy, 2261.01, which is engagement in federal programs, and then finally our purchasing of sales and services and goods, which is 6320. And so we've met with all of the administrative leads on the 4 policies and actually expanded upon what we previously mentioned as a questionnaire. And it's more of a prompt where we ask the administration to report to us for each aspect, so really at a bullet point level of each policy, what has been done to date, things that have not yet been fully addressed, what are the plans, what evidence can we see that things have been done to date, and then finally, how do we prove that the policy and the actions that you have taken are fully implemented in the spirit of the impact that the policy committee intended to have. So those are the questions we've posed to our administrative team, and that has actually been expanded out now to 30 members of the administration giving us input over the various aspects and ownership. And so the administrative team has asked that they have until November 30th to complete those requests, provide the information back to internal audit, leaving us approximately 8 days to review what was given and make some conclusions to report back to the audit committee via memo on the 14th of December and ultimately back to this committee on December 16th.
I think it sounds great. And I want to say I really, really appreciate the difference between this and last month. And I think the difference between have sub-policies been created to follow last month versus what's actually happening in the world and putting that on the people who are responsible for them. I think it just sounds really A+. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one request for when you do bring that information back to us. And this may be something you all are thinking of doing already, but for each of those policies, or I mean, you could do it for parts of policies if they're super long. We'll leave that to you. Some kind of rating. Yes, like big picture. This is, something we should brag about from the rooftops. Something that is totally on fire and a mess. Like what grade is in the middle, just so we can get a sense of, before going into the details, how worried or not worried should we be about this?
That's a great suggestion. I think that would really help us quantify in a consistent manner among all of the policies as well.
And to do prioritizing later and things.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
Just a couple of comments on the equity policy. The equity policy, like the anti-racism policy, does present almost a grocery list of things that we're supposed to be doing and watching. And so I know that's helpful. But also on the equity policy, the equity and excellence in education requires that on an annual basis, the superintendent and treasurer together to develop a plan with clear, measurable accountability standards and procedures that can be assessed and reported transparently to the public. The Cincinnati Public Schools Equity Plan will be submitted annually to the board for approval and its subsequent implementation by all departments. And school sites will be reviewed by the board at least semi-annually. Well, that's not really happened. So I really, of all these three, that one has that we've already looked forward on that one. And the anti-racism is very clear with specifics. So I think that's very important. And last night at the district-wide LSCMC meeting, they had about 140 people remotely, virtually. They were presented they did an update from Dan's presentation or whomever about the anti-racism policy and specific to what LSCMCs and sites are supposed to be doing. So they're on course there, but it's my understanding that our person in charge of that, as she presented, it was like a 3 or 4 year plan. And I think that might work, but I would assume that if that was presented to the board would probably say that needs to be more accelerated. So it's to whom you're reporting. So, but I'm confident and glad we have the internal auditor person.
Couldn't be more grateful. Thank you, Ms.
Oh,
Roberts,
my
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you all. We'll see you at the December meeting. Have a great day.
You too.
I smell a potential OSBA presentation with internal auditor and policy folks someday. Like, I don't know that this is a common thing. So appreciate Mr. Lindy assigning it. Appreciate Ms. Roberts and her team. Appreciate Ms. Bolton's obviously chairing finance and then the de facto member of the audit committee as well. Like, it all is sort of seamless. So I don't really know what I'm doing here, but everybody else is doing a great job.
We've been meaning to talk to you, Mike.
No, but seriously,
the people sent you back.
They sent me back. They did, even with all the baggage.
All the baggage.
All the baggage. Seriously, it's kind of a unique, really neat, cool thing, and I think it really can be a precedent setter. So, thank you all. 100%. So our continued review of our policies, I will turn this over to Mr. Hoying.
All right. Clearly, why the 300 people in the audience have shown up today is discussion
Just for you, Dan, just for you.
of our policy 3120.07, contracting with consultants. I'm going to try to bring things up on the screen as well.
Oh,
We were asked to bring this policy back to review or to add language that makes a distinction between employees and independent contractors. It's been something that not just CPS, but lots of organizations have dealt with and struggled with. So added language from IRS and other kind of best practices about distinguishing between persons who are engaged by the district as an independent contractor and persons who are properly classified as employees. In general, a person should be classified as an employee if the district has the right to control or direct only the result of the work, not what will be done and how it will be done, etc. Glad to answer any questions. This is an assignment from last month's policy committee.
Mr. Lindsay, do you have any questions about this one?
I do not.
I have only one, and just informational, and maybe change. I would add, instead of just that broad term administration, I would add facilities. The district, to assist the district in it. Am I on the right one? Yeah, contracting with consultants. Administration, facilities. Most of the consultants and the most expensive ones have always been about facilities, it seems to me. And then I have a question too. Are school sites empowered to hire consultants, or is it a strictly district?
Within the contracting process, I think schools, budget managers have certain discretion, but is your question whether or not they have the ability to sort of make the determination of whether somebody should be an employee or a contractor?
Yeah.
So there is a review team that reviews new contracts coming in to try to sort out when somebody should not be employed as engaged as a contractor. So when they would get, be seeking payment for that through the treasurer's office, there is some review.
I just wonder, because that's where so much of this happens, where some of the complaints is that consultant versus employee, but also who knows who. I mean, as we review all these policies, as we want equitable access to our resources, even though we know we wanted to do some more decentralizing according to the community survey, but I think that if we could build that in, I don't think it's clear.
Got it. Okay.
And there's usually little contracts, 10,000 here or 4,000 there or something, but still, who's hiring their own family, who's hiring their neighbor or their golf partner or whatever.
So ensuring that all the ethics rules that apply, and conflict of interest rules apply to.
That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. We can add that and bring it back next month.
Well, I mean, if everybody's okay with it, if whatever, if we're okay with it, we could still pass it through.
But just adding that now and passing it through on Monday. Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
This is fine with me.
Whatever you figures out how to do it.
Yeah.
Move forward.
Yeah.
We'll do. Okay, our next policy that is 4121, criminal history records check. No substantive changes to this, but there have been some updates since I think we reviewed it last, among others, that criminal records checks are required on a 5-year basis for employees. We added that. I'll try to bring it up on the screen. Glad to answer any questions about this policy. there is, by the way, a more kind of fulsome description of what's required, and I've made reference to that in Board Policy 8475. That policy has been reviewed more recently than this, so incorporated that by reference. Glad to answer your question.
Mr. Lindy, Ms. Bolton? Yeah, I got none. We're past it. Yeah, fine. No change.
Move forward. We also recommend since we're, again, continuing to try to combine our policies, rescinding 4121, which is exactly duplicative of this. This would make it up. We're going to continue with that. Okay, thanks. Next policy is 3122, non-discrimination and equal employment opportunity. I'll note that this policy was last updated in 2018 when the board added gender identity or expression to the existing employment protected categories, gender identity or expression. We also include, of course, sexual orientation, sex, and others. Glad to answer. I'm going to bring it up on the screen and glad to answer any questions. No recommended changes, but I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Ms. Bolton?
Yes, at the last sentence, it's physical or mental disability or status as a disabled veteran or veteran of the Vietnam era. That is my war, so I'm glad that that's there. But is that because of federal law? Or are we allowed to add that it's about all veterans? Or?
I'm not aware of any specific protections for Vietnam veterans. So if
I was wondering the same thing.
I'd like, wherever I can, I want to see some reference to our guys and gals of my generation, but I would like to expand that to other veterans as
just
well.
leave it at better.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, I'll pass that one forward then on Monday.
Okay, so with that change, move forward. Yep. Thank you. We'll also recommend rescission of 4122, which is, again, duplicative of 3122. Perfect. Next policy is our alcohol, drug-free, and work environment policy, 3122.01. I'll bring that up on the screen. This policy I did update or recommend updating. Primarily because just the language was outdated. For reference, the language that I recommend adding comes directly from the Ohio Department of Education Licensure Code of Professional Educators. So this is the language that's included in essentially the professional code for teachers, coaches, paraprofessionals, et cetera, that relates to alcohol and drug use. I'll bring it up on the screen and glad to answer your question.
Questions, Ms. Bolton? No?
Nope.
I don't have any either.
Okay, move forward.
Yeah, moving forward.
Great. We'll also recommend rescission of 4122.01, which is the same version for classified staff. The last one I have for you this morning is no recommended changes, but it's board policy 3130, assignment and transfer. It sort of emphasizes the right of the administration and board to transfer employees when, in the judgment of the superintendent, is for the welfare of the employee or the schools. This is also a part of, it must be done consistent with the district's collective bargaining agreements with its various union groups, but this language is generally included in all of our collective bargaining. No recommended changes. Bring it up on the screen. Glad to answer any questions.
Any questions, Ms. Bolton?
I have a question, and I know this is probably not the best way to raise this issue, but as we've gone through these several months now, with through the superintendency and then the interim superintendency, this issue of transfer at will. And certainly we don't want the board to be able to do that. But I also have some great reservations about the non-represented folks having no recourse. Because we've witnessed a significant number of changes in responsibility and changes that did probably represented great judgment. No problem. Not talking about it. I'm talking about the process that you have. What is it, about 150 or so? Maybe that's wrong. Unrepresented people in the district, meaning they're not part of any union. And I, as a public entity, it's not, as Mr. Messer was concerned on Monday night about this, it's not what, whatever. Executives can do what they want to do to get things enforced. That, you know what, in public sector, it's a different work environment than it is in a private company. So I am concerned about the non-represented not having representation, and they could be changed at will. I don't think that's right. So and I don't want to take any power away from the superintendent, but I also don't want unrepresented people to have no protection or no whatever I'm thinking, rights. Can we all, is this the place to talk, is this the policy to talk about it, or is there a better policy, or?
Well, I may want to understand a little bit more specifically what scenarios you envision. I will say, from an administrator's perspective, represented or unrepresented, there's a bit of law that protects an administrator from being, let's say, 3319.02 of the Ohio Revised Code relates to other administrators and says that an administrator cannot be transferred to a position of lesser responsibility during the term of the contract. So there is some protection there. Obviously, we also have some folks who are not administrators and unrepresented. So I'm not sure that same language would apply. But maybe we can talk and bring this back next month with a proposed sentence or two.
Yeah, because a large number of our unrepresented people are confidential assistants everywhere, and they actually handle probably more of our business than anybody, and they place some trust in us as employers to give up their protection. So I would just like us to be able to address that.
Yes, ma'am. We'll bring it back.
All right, prudent. Yep. Done. Yep. All right. Is that it, Mr. Hoying?
That's what we have for you this morning. Yes.
Awesome. I'll remind the folks watching, the few of y'all out there, if you would like to speak, raise your hand now. And when we call on you, you'll have 2 minutes, and you have to turn on your camera. We ask that you, if you want a direct response, put contact information in the chat, and Mr. Robert will set you up. As y'all are doing that, I'll see if there is any other business. As of right now, it looks like the agenda from Ms. Davis is a reminder. Our agenda next time, we'll continue our discussion regarding potential sub-policies for vaccinations, which I know is not a real thing, but makes sense in my brain. We're going to continue talking about the attendance boundary lines, look at some maps. There, again, as a reminder, they are all in Ms. Bolton's office. I've seen them numerous times. They're all right there. We'll talk about open enrollment and the number of interesting things that came up, including what, if anything, does it cost? Are we losing money? And then Mr. Lindy's proposal of, can we only do open enrollment with people who do open enrollment with us? And then there was the other one from Ms. Bolton that I thought was really interesting, and why am I brain farting? The Digital Academy, thank you. Can we just have open enrollment for CDA? Thank you. So those, I think, are what. Yeah, go for it.
That the Assistant General Counsel presented to us to be written as a memo to the Policies Committee to be shared, so that we have 3 new board members coming on in less than 2 months, and that's an important history. And if you could embellish a little bit about the legal aspects of how we did it in the 70s versus what we would be allowed to do now, and a map, this wonderful map, or a link where we can play with that, or whatever. That would be
Regarding the
great.
boundaries and the Bronson case and all that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, smart. Great. So, any other business for Mr. Lindy or Ms. Bolton? Mr. Lindy.
It's not so much new business, Mr. Morosky. I just thought of a question about the sports item.
Okay.
Is it an okay time to ask that?
Yeah, go for it.
I have this assumption that I want to check, and if we don't know the answer today, I think it's okay just to give my business. That as kids are playing sports this year, we're not seeing big outbreaks. And
What was that?
We're not seeing big outbreaks of COVID on sports teams. And I just truly don't know. I had a feeling that if it were bad, we would be hearing about it, but I think sometimes it's good to check that. And just some kind of update on what we're seeing. That could be from,
I mean, we definitely
not
had
the
some
Office of Legal Counsel.
we definitely had some cancellations. I mean, Schroeder, I know, was particularly hit with several weeks. I think they were pulled off. They were near pulled off the field because of a late news, not by anyone's bad intent. But Schroeder got hit. Yeah, I think some of our schools had some missed weeks for football. We hope. I think that's going down, and certainly the test to play will reduce that. But yeah, I can get some more information.
Yeah, that I'd appreciate. I think both in terms of how much spread we've seen, and I think has there been any serious. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, do we have anybody, Mr. Robert? All right. Well, how about that? 4 minutes left. We will see you all in December. Again, as a reminder, the December Policy Committee date is December the 16th, and it is at 9 a.m. Right here and virtually. Meeting is adjourned.